Hey, this is the DeWitt District Library gift guide for people who are stumped. Books make great gifts. These are our suggestions.
You just did it.
Yeah. Gotcha, babe.
All right. So our first category is for the foodie.
Okay, and who among us is not a foodie now?
Exactly. Who doesn't like to eat?
Yeah, exactly. My husband, over the course of the last 9 months, has become obsessed with Jacques Pepin, and he is he's updated and reissuing a new book that he wrote originally like 20 years ago called Jacques Pepin's Quick and Simple. And he also has a bunch of videos online. He puts out a new one every week. And my husband just finds them really soothing. He loves his French accent. He's he's actually like a really frugal cook. He shows you what to do with like the ends of the scallions and, things like that. And all the food looks absolutely delicious. So this is what I'm getting him for Christmas. Although hopefully he won't watch this and figure that out ahead of time.
Oh. The book that I am suggesting is one by someone that most people probably are familiar with because she was on Food Network, The Barefoot Contessa. So Anna Garten has a new modern comfort food. So she's taken sort of classic childhood favorites and reinvented them in a more mature way. In her same yum, comforting, style of cooking. So.
Oh, I love her.
I know.
Yeah, she's the best. She's the best person.
She's really kind of calm and relaxing, I think, too.
Mm-hmm.
I've never made any of her recipes before, but
I have, and they really, really always work. Like she tests the bejeebus out of them. There, see, I didn't swear. But they always work, so you don't have to worry.
A cookbook that I thought looked really exciting is this one right here called Midwest Made. I hope that's not backwards. It looks backwards on my screen. But yeah, so she focuses on baking traditions of the Midwest. So it's all about comfort food. It's about coziness, sentimentality, recipes that have been passed down through the generations, traditions, all that good stuff. I don't even know where to start in terms of showing you guys recipes because they all look amazing. She has like the classics like monkey bread and peanut blossoms, and she has a pasty recipe for the UP, St. Louis gooey butter cake. Yeah, it just looks really, really good. And I'm really picky about cookbooks that I would actually buy for my collection, but this is one that I would actually add. So, highly recommend it.
Making me hungry. Talking about delicious food.
Yeah.
So the book I'm going to talk about, I think several of us wanted to talk about. And
it gets 4 stars or 4 thumbs up.
It's the Half-Baked Harvest Super Simple Cookbook. I actually own it, and I've cooked almost all the recipes in the book. Everything is fantastic. I actually feel like I can cook when I make something of hers. I follow her on Instagram. I'm a little obsessed. They actually are super simple. And I literally, I have this little cookbook stand, and it is always in the cookbook stand. I don't change it out for any of the cookbook that I own. So it's the best cookbook that I own personally. And I would give it to anyone who might feel like they want a good home cooked meal, but might be intimidated by lots of fancy ingredients, because these are actually really easy. All right. So our next category is for the Thrillseeker.
Okay, I'm going to recommend The Wicked Sister by Karen Dion. She wrote a book that I absolutely loved called The March King's Daughter. As that book was, this is set in the UP, and Publishers Weekly has put it in their top 10 mysteries of the year. I know it's going to be good.
My suggestion for this category is actually a series by David Baldacci, the Memory Man series. I believe the first one came out maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But it's just really super action packed, and the main character was a professional football player who suffered a head injury, and as a side effect of the injury, suffers from 2 medical conditions, hyperthymesia and synesthesia, which just means that he remembers everything and he tends to see things in color. And not only did he have that tragic event happen with the injury that ended his football career, but then years later, he came home to find his wife and child murdered. So he kind of falls into the depths of despair for quite a long time, until they are able to solve the mystery, and then the series takes off from there. But anyway, super action packed, likable characters, and yeah, I think most mystery adventure seekers would like it.
I would like to recommend The Devil and the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. This book has gotten a lot of hype recently, and for good reason. I've actually read it and I really enjoyed it. If you're not already familiar, he wrote The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I think a couple of years ago it came out, and that was excellent. I'm a really big fan of the classic kind of golden age mystery whodunit situation. And I think he's really mastered that, but also putting his own unique spin on it. So I think if you enjoy those, you'll enjoy this book. But even if you don't, I think you'll still find something to love. It's a murder, or a series of murders, that takes place on the high seas in 1634. There are supernatural elements with strange symbols and a lot of really peculiar things happening. The cast of characters is really, really fascinating and really dynamic. And I was really surprised by the ending. So I highly recommend it. It's excellent.
The book that I am recommending is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Morea Garcia. This book has a little bit of everything. It's set in like glamorous 1950s Mexico. So like the setting is already kind of pulling you in, and it's like a gothic, it's a little bit of everything. It's kind of crazy. It's a gothic thriller featuring aristocrats, debutantes, an eerie mansion, and secrets galore. It also has like supernatural elements as well, and it's been described as like Lovecraft meets Bronte. To do with that what you will. It's also set to be a television show, so you can give this to your friend who likes to read it before they see it. Our next category is For the Book Clubber.
Boy, this was tough because it's always tough to pick a good book group book. But I'm interested in having our group read Cased by Isabel Wilkerson. And in it, I know that she looks at the United States through the prism of the caste system in India and compares and contrasts them. And I just think that's a really interesting way to look at the racial divide, whatever you want to call it, and another way of looking at how you can possibly overcome it. So I would like our group to read that.
All right. The book that I picked is a book about books. So I don't know what year it came out. I was just looking up to see. It's been out for a few years, but Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore. And the reads, I think you could recommend this book or purchase this book as a gift for anybody who likes books, mysteries, even someone who's a little bit techie, because of all of those elements present in the book. But it follows the story of a young man who loses his job in Silicon Valley, essentially, and goes to work in this sort of antiquated, dusty old bookstore. And he works the late shift, and he notices that people don't really buy books. They just come in and they borrow these really old, obscure volumes that can't figure out. So he uses his sort of tech background and his interesting cast of friends to kind of dig deeper into the mystery of Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. I think it's a little bit National Treasure. I feel like I had that little bit of a feel to it too. I don't. You've read it, Jacqueline. Have you read it, Susan? Okay, I don't know who
I
else
have
has.
not. I've
Okay.
heard it's really good though.
Yeah.
I started it. It has something to do with Michigan, like the authors from Michigan or
Oh, it
something.
might. There might be a Michigan connection. I'll have to look into that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just like the combination of sort of tech and the ancient volumes and a little bit of mystery, and so it was a fun read. And bonus, the cover glows in the dark.
I'm
How
sold.
fun is that?
This one was tough for me as well. I think I had a few that I wanted to go with, but I actually have one of them with me. Excuse me. This book sounded really interesting. It came out during quarantine. It's called Conditional Citizens. I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but the author, she's an immigrant to the US from Morocco, and she uses her experience to explore what it means to be American, what are the boundaries, what benefits are afforded citizens, and then where is the divide. She argues that there's this group of people she calls conditional citizens, who on one hand America embraces, I think, as part of their like melting pot kind of ideal, but on the other hand they push them away, and they're not necessarily afforded those same rights and liberties that people who are born here or white people essentially are afforded. So it sounded really interesting to me, and I think it'd be really interesting as a book club book or any kind of conversation starter.
The book I chose is Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered, the definitive how-to guide by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Stark. I love this book. I picked this book up for myself, and then I ended up gifting it to someone else. It's so good. If you follow the crime comedy podcast, My Favorite Murder, these are the two hosts of that show. So this is like a little bit of true crime, a little bit of like dual memoir with a ton of comedy like thrown in. It's just got a little bit of everything that someone can pull something out of and talk about. And if you love true crime, I mean, this is really great to listen to. Read. But if you did want to listen to it, the audiobook is narrated by both of the authors. So you've got that kind of tie-in from the podcast to the book. So
The most buzzed about book that I know of is the one I picked, which is The Promised Land by Barack Obama, because everybody's talking about it and he's been everywhere, and he wrote it himself, god darn it. And I just think about how many people read Michelle Obama's book, and I just think this is like a guaranteed home run.
So the book I picked is actually a forthcoming title. I think it's releasing on, I wrote it down, December 7th, so still in time to gift for a holiday gift. It's by James Patterson, but it's a little bit different. I know he writes all over the place anyway, for children through adults and fiction and nonfiction. But is The Last Days of John Lennon. And so it's a little bit music history, a little bit true crime. But it tells the story through interviews with Lennon's friends and colleagues. And it sounds like there's a lot of emphasis on him and his relationship with Paul McCartney, and a lot of interviews with that. So I think anybody who's a music fan or true crime or just a Beatles fan would certainly be interested in it. I know I'm looking forward to it.
So again, this was tough to choose. But the one I finally settled on that I really, really want to read is Hidden Valley Road. Yeah, everybody's talking about this book. In case you haven't heard, the author recounts the story of this all-American family from, I think, the 1950s or 60s, with 12 children, and 6 of the boys ended up developing schizophrenia throughout their lifetime, which is just insane. And so it follows, you know, each of the boys who developed the disease, and it how it kind of manifested. It talks about the science of schizophrenia and sort of the lack of understanding of the medical community at the time, and just the horrors of what they were going through and the different treatments. And they were eventually, I think, studied by the NIH just because of this extraordinary situation. And it just sounds really, really interesting. Horrifying, but interesting.
I know, you've heard that it's sort of hereditary, but not at that degree, like that many. Wow.
Right. And that's one of the things I think the book addresses, is sort of the nature versus nurture aspect to it. Because 6 out of 12 is,
yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, a lot. That one sounded interesting to me.
So the book that I chose was Buzzed About to Me by Rhoda. She put this on my radar as the teen librarian. She thought it would be a good crossover title, and I ended up reading it while we were in quarantine, and I'm so glad I did. It is one of my favorite books of this year. It is called We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. It's set during the 80s, the late 80s. The story follows the Danvers High girls field hockey team as they make a bid for the state championship, which I know it sounds like a sports book, but it's actually like kind of witchy. Like, it's set near Salem, Massachusetts. So there's kind of like these, it's like Amelia Estevez and witchcraft and growing pains. And even if you didn't grow up in the 80s, this will give you feelings of nostalgia and being in high school and how that can be hard, and about relationships, and just, it's such a romp. It's so much fun, and it has a really great ending. So I'm gonna buzz about it all the time. So good. Next category, for the outdoor adventure.
Okay, the book I'm going to suggest, it's older. My book group full of friends read it. It's called Grandma Gatewood's Walk, and it is about this incredible lady. She was the first woman to be a thru hiker on the Appalachian Trail. But there's also so much more to what her story is. Anyway, it's just phenomenal. It'll make you think there really isn't anything I can't overcome after you read this book. 2 thumbs up. All right, who's next?
All right, so the book that I'm going to suggest also takes place on the Appalachian Trail. Ironically.
What do you know?
Didn't plan that. And this one has been around for a while too, but it is by Bill Bryson, A Call to Walk in the Woods. And if you're familiar with Bill Bryson, he's just a really incredible storyteller, and he so easily can thread comedy and facts and science all through his books, history. But so he gets asked to hike the Appalachian Trail and agrees to do it, but doesn't really quite know what he's in for. So it takes you all the way from him preparing for the hike and then throughout the hike. But he does a really great job of, like I said, weaving in, sort of the history of the trail and the ecology and the different sites along the trail and things like that, people they encounter along the trail. And as always, he's an author that if you can get the audio book, he's one that always, I don't know that he's ever had a different narrator, but he reads his own books and he's really good at it. So I would recommend the audiobook version as well.
One of the authors that I was going to recommend, if you like to explore in Michigan, is Ron Rademacher. His company is called Michigan Backroads, and he's actually presented at the library a couple of times. He travels around the state pretty much year round, looking for little known, really cool natural spots to hike or visit or camp or whatever. So he always says in his presentations that he won't talk about Traverse City. So it's usually stuff you haven't heard of, and I've tested out some of his trails, and yeah, I've been really impressed. So I love that he's a local author too. I would recommend that for a Michigan explorer.
The book that I'm going to recommend is Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller. It follows the life and work of taxonomist David Starr Jordan as he tries to organize the amazing chaos that is nature, which is impossible. But it's fun to see him try. It's written by Lulu Miller, who's of the NPR fame. She writes for the science desk at NPR, and she interjects her own personal experiences and kind of ties the whole thing together nicely. So it's a little bit like memoir, a little bit like science writing. There's like murder and lots of outdoor gathering of species. Like, I didn't realize how many species this one person kind of discovered and named and categorized. And I mean, it's crazy. We owe so much of like modern science to what this guy has found out in nature. So I like the book because even if you're not into science, it really displays how people cope with life and persevere through the chaos that is life. So scientific adventure that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And I just really loved it. It's not a very long book, but oh, so good. For the Out of This World Traveler.
And didn't actually read this book, but I want to. It's called This Is How You Lose the Time War. And it's by, oh gal, I can't remember who it's by. It's by two people. Max Gladstone's one of them. And, oh gal, I can't find, we'll find out the person's name and put it in here. But anyway, it was described to me as if like The Lake House by James Patterson was like set in an outer space, war, and well written. Okay, all right, there, good enough. I want to read it, so do you. Go ahead.
Oh, all right. So the book that I am recommending, I think, would make an excellent gift book for any science fiction fan. And I think Susan and I were talking about the fact that we don't own, or maybe it was Jacqueline. You own a lot of books, Jacqueline. It must have been Susan. We were talking about how we don't really own a lot of books, but I think this is a book that I would want to own because you could come back to it often. But it is the Neil Gaiman Reader, and it's selected fiction of his writing. So it includes excerpts from 5 of his novels, as well as I think 50 or nearly 50 of his short stories. So it's a pretty significant volume. I don't remember looking up how many pages it is, but again, I don't know if there'll be an audiobook recording of it, but he is probably my favorite narrator. Again, reads all of his own material and does a phenomenal job of it. But I think it would be a really good gift book because it's something that you could come back to repeatedly, pick it up and read a random short story here and there. But I'm looking forward to it. This is one I would put on my bookshelf at home and keep.
So the book that I finally settled on is The Once and Future Witches by Alex Harrow. And again, it's received a lot of hype. And I really enjoyed this book because, yes, it's a fantasy book, but I think it has broader appeal than that. It's a story of witchcraft. It's set in like an alternate United States in the late 1800s. And at the time, witchcraft is illegal, but sort of mothers have kind of passed down some old spells and potions sort of through their children and through the generations. And the book focuses on 3 sisters who that's happened to them. Their grandmother actually passed down some witchcraft, but they've since split up. But one night, one of the sisters performs kind of a half spell, and something big happens, and it brings them all back together, sort of on this quest to bring witchcraft back to the world. But also, I think it's really about feminism and empowering women to kind of harness their own power, which is where I think the broader appeal comes from. So it was just an excellent book. If you're into language, the language is really beautiful. as well. This author has a gift for that if you've read any of the previous books. Yeah, highly recommended. Beautiful story, beautifully written. Gift it.
The book that I'm recommending is my most anticipated book this year, and it's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I will read anything this person writes. I don't care if it's on an accent and she wrote it down. I'll read it and I'll love it. She's such a good writer. So this is a Faustian tale about a girl who, out of desperation, makes a deal with the devil to live forever, but the catch is that she will never be remembered. So she goes about living her life, and all of a sudden, someone remembers her name. And she kind of has this quest to figure out why that happened. And it's just supposed to be such a beautiful story. I haven't read it yet. It's sitting on my shelf because it's so pretty. I just like to look at it. The other nice thing about giving this type of book as a gift is because V.E. Schwab is so popular, they print multiple editions of her book with different covers. So you could really find a different edition and gift that, or gift 2 copies of the same book that are both done differently, which is really cool. I know people that collect like one specific author, just kind of do different variations of the same book, which I think is really cool. So I am so excited about this book, and I think any fantasy lover, there's romance in it. So if you have someone who likes romance thrown in with their fantasy, this might be a good one too.